Hello everybody, this is Mr. Moppin coming at you with a AP government video. This is focusing in on topic 2.12, taking a look at the federal bureaucracy. Now, when we talk about the bureaucracy, remember this is basically all of the subordinates of the President of the United States, basically going through the entire branch. Now, in terms of sheer employees, the bureaucracy is obviously by far the largest of the three branches of government. It is a virtual galaxy of departments and agencies and things like that. And we've talked some of it with regards to things such as the White House office, the executive office of the president, but we're going to go way beyond that. To give you just a very, very, concise view of what the federal bureaucracy looks like, you got the president at the top here. You've got 15 different, including Homeland Security, 15 different cabinet departments, each with their own secretary and their own massive labyrinth of offices and responsibilities. And then down here is this huge list of independent agencies and government corporations that do not fit into one of these 15 departments. So, when I say that the federal bureaucracy is almost like a galaxy of federal employees, it really is vast. It really, really is. Now, that being said, be aware that at the top of the bureaucratic pyramid, or at least the upper reaches of it, where you have these cabinet secretaries, like the Secretary of Homeland Security, and their, various top subordinates, like the Assistant Secretary of Labor or the Deputy Secretary of State for Middle East Relations or whatever. These positions, and there are over 2,000 of them, these are all appointed personally by the President of the United States and require Senate confirmation. Now, what this tells us is that unlike the vast majority of the bureaucrats in the executive branch that have earned their jobs through testing and formal interviews and things like that, these are political appointees, meaning the president picks them, and the vast majority of the time, the folks that are picked for these positions are members of the president's party. So right now, with President Biden in the White House as a Democrat, you can look at all of the heads of the various cabinet departments. These are all headed by Democrats, and their top subordinates are all Democrats. That's just kind of how it works. And what that then also means is that every time there's a new president, basically all of these folks quit or are let go, for lack of a better term, and they are all replaced by new politically chosen appointments by the new President of the United States. Now, there's not quite as much turnover if it's going from two presidents of the same party, but even still, there is a lot of turnover. So understand that the large base of the bureaucracy are made up of career bureaucrats who are there in that same position regardless of who the president is, and their jobs have nothing to do with their own personal politics. But the folks at the top of the pyramid, those are purely political positions, appointed personally by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and they are replaced every time there's a new president. Once again, keep in mind there are 15 cabinet-level departments, and note you can see that they are ordered here in terms of when they were first created, starting with the State Department and coming all the way out here to the Department of Homeland Security. So there are 15 formal cabinet departments that make up what we call the cabinet. Now, in addition to these cabinet level departments, and no, if you go back up here, these, if we're using a galactic metaphor, if you will, these are all big planets, if you will. Now, some are bigger than others. Obviously, the Defense Department is the biggest of these planets, if you will. Energy is much smaller. Veterans Affairs is much smaller. But that is just one part of the galaxy. You have got all of these much, much, much smaller planets down in through here, these independent agencies. And they're independent because they don't fit in one of these 15 big departments. They do their own thing, but they are much smaller because they have a much narrower range of focus. For example, NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, as the name implies, only deals with issues of space, whereas the Defense Department is dealing with all sorts of things dealing with the military. So, these are much smaller planets, if you will, or to use a food metaphor, kind of like I sometimes like to use, think of these independent agencies as kind of like bite-sized candy bars, or in other words, bite-sized departments unto themselves. Now note, some of these other agencies that you are familiar with, like the FBI, for example, they are agencies that do exist within a given department. So the FBI is not an independent agency like NASA. It's not its own little bite-sized little independent agency. The FBI fits inside the Department of Justice. So be aware that just because you hear an agency's name, don't think that it's its own independent thing. In many cases, it is within a much larger department. Now, in addition to some of these independent agencies and departments, you also have a number of independent commissions. Commissions exist to regulate some part of the U.S. economy. Now, these commissions are led by boards, such as the Federal Reserve Board or the Federal Trade Commission Board. These members of these commission boards are appointed by the President of the United States, but note they serve for staggered terms, generally over large periods of time. For example, if you are a member of the Federal Reserve Board, you serve for 14 years. And so the reason that these terms are staggered for these regulatory commissions and they are so long is that it helps to guarantee that multiple presidents across different parties likely are going to have a say on who's on these boards, which will give them a less partisan, less political aspect to them, and promotes more stability in terms of regulating their respective part of the economy. The Federal Reserve Board is our national banking system. The SEC is not the Southeastern Conference, sorry college football folks, but it's the Securities and Exchange Commission. They regulate the stock market. The FTC is the Federal Trade Commission. They exist to basically make sure that there's fair competition in the world of business, identify and eliminate dangerous monopolies, all that kind of stuff. So whenever you hear the word commission as part of the bureaucracy, think regulation. They exist to kind of serve as referees to make sure that there's fairness in terms of that respective industry. Now, in addition to these independent agencies and commissions, obviously beyond the big departments, there are also what we call government corporations. Now, government corporations, as the name implies, tells us that the government is involved in running certain businesses. Now, yes, some of you might be thinking, hold on, isn't that what's found in a socialist country? True. And understand the United States does have some degree of socialism with regards to the federal government. Now, not nearly as much as you would find in other parts of the world, but a little bit. For example, the United States Postal Service, the USPS, is a government corporation. It is run by the federal government. It exists to try to make money. Amtrak is another example of a federal corporation. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, which is a government insurance program for banks. So these are government corporations that exist. Once again, they're designed to be fairly non-political, although their heads are appointed by the president. So understand that we do have that component of the government. Now, when we do talk about the size and the vastness of this bureaucratic galaxy that exists out there, that is up to the whims of Congress, if you will. I shouldn't say the word whims, but it is up to the discretion of Congress. All of these bureaucratic departments and agencies don't exist by presidential fiat. They don't just say, I want this, and it happens. The size of the bureaucracy, the funding for the bureaucracy, all of that is dictated by Congress. Now, granted, Congress will generally listen to what the president wants. For example, after 9/11, President Bush wanted the creation of a Department of Homeland Security, and Congress will create that for him. But note, it is Congress's responsibility to dictate the size and the responsibilities of the various departments and agencies that exist in the bureaucracy. Now, when I say that, that might seem like Congress really has a stranglehold on what the bureaucracy does, but in reality, that's not the case. Yes, Congress creates the structure for the bureaucracy, and yes, Congress creates the laws that the bureaucracy must enforce. All that is true, but legislation in and of itself can only say so much. It can only consider so many specific potential situations in terms of how legislation should be enforced. What this means is that there's a lot of gray area in legislation that allows individual bureaucratic departments and agencies and just individual bureaucrats themselves to have a lot of leeway, to have a lot of discretion, if you will, in terms of how to enforce a certain law, what it means to enforce it. So understand, the bureaucracy has a lot of its own kind of independent powers from Congress, and yes, even with regards to the president, their top boss within their same branch. Just because a president may want a certain law enforced a certain way, even directed by executive order, when it works its way down through the system, there's still going to be a lot of discretion for these individual bureaucrats. Now, when we do talk about some of the powers and responsibilities of these bureaucratic agencies, particularly with commissions and stuff like that, enforcement does come with the power in some cases of, for example, levying fines. In other words, they have some degree of quasi-judicial power. In other words, if you are the Environmental Protection Agency, you have the ability to enforce environmental protection laws. And based on what the legislation says, and based on bureaucratic discretion and the structure of the EPA, you can not only check for compliance of, for example, the Clean Air Act, but if you find a corporation, if you will, that is in violation of the Clean Air Act, then you have some degree of quasi-judicial power to create, penalties. For example, levy fines in response to that. Another key responsibility of these agency heads and cabinet secretaries, the folks that run these individual departments and agencies and whatnot, they regularly testify in front of congressional committees. And basically, they are brought in for a number of reasons. Sometimes they're brought in as experts with regards to a certain area of policy. So if you're, for example, are taking a look at a major education bill, you might have the Department of Education Secretary brought in to kind of throw their 2 cents in terms of what they think. But they are also brought in on a regular basis to serve basically Congress's oversight function. When a bill is passed into law, Congress doesn't just give birth to that law and hand it over to the bureaucracy and just kind of waves it bye-bye forever. No, Congress doesn't work that way. The various oversight committees that exist in Congress, they will continue to monitor that legislation with the respective agency or department head that is responsible for enforcing that legislation. They're looking to see, is the legislation doing what it is intended to do? And based on what the department head or agency head is going to tell them, they can make some decisions. Either it's being enforced well or properly up to Congress's standards, or it's not being funded, or it's not being enforced properly up to Congress's standards. And then they have to decide, is that is that flaw, is that lack of enforcement, is that a result of a flaw in the way the law is crafted, or is it a flaw in the actual bureaucratic decisions that are made to enforce that, which then forces Congress to kind of make some decisions. Should they rewrite the law? Should they create more specific, explicit directions for bureaucrats? Should they recommend to the president that this particular agency head be replaced? All those things, can play a factor. So we'll leave it there for this video right here, taking a look at, it's kind of a basic introductory overview of what the federal bureaucracy looks like. We'll see you next time.